little blonde goblin.
Hey gang, quick video today. Quick by my standards. For me, anything under 45 minutes might as well be vertically oriented. Because it's like a TikTok or something. Anyway, whatever. It's almost a big U.S. election. In the past week, we've just been getting smacked in the face by October surprises. We got Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, calling him a fascist authoritarian, followed up by that clip of Tony Hinchcliffe at MSG. And, I didn't like what he said either, but I gotta say, it's kind of nice to see a comedy clip go viral that isn't crowd work. But then something really upsetting happened. Michael Wolff released audio of Jeffrey Epstein dishing about Donald Trump and made my last video obsolete. What the heck, dude? So I want to do a quick, extra chill Goblin video about this unexpected drop from Michael Wolff. The last few months, I've been hardcore spelunking down the Jeffrey Epstein rabbit hole. I just finished a video on Epstein and Trump, currently in the middle of making one on Epstein and Clinton. I listened to all these clips. I listened to the full podcast with Michael Wolff, and I have a few bits of context that I can add, and also some takes that I haven't seen shared around very much, so let's do this. You remember Michael Wolff, right? He's that guy who wrote Fire and Fury, that 2018 Trump expose book that everyone's most MSNBC-pilled aunt scooped up, and also me. Yeah, I paid money for this. I'm not proud of it or anything. It's a well-written book in its way. It's hard to put down. It's easy to read. And it reveals all these crazy secrets about the Trump presidency. Like, according to this, Trump was planning to lose the 2016 election so that he could use the fame to launch a news channel. There's also, Trump had an affair with Nikki Haley. There's all kinds of crazy stuff in here. And he writes it all almost in the style of a novel, giving direct quotes from very powerful people in seemingly private settings. But in my last video, I mentioned that I don't consider Michael Wolff to be very reliable. And the reason is he doesn't ever reveal any of his sources. Reading his books is quite a bizarre experience. It's all like omniscient narrator stuff. Like, here's my impression of what it's like to read Michael Wolff. Donald Trump carefully locked the door behind him. Finally, he and Melania could be alone. No one around, not even that nosy journalist, Michael Wolff. He turned to Melania, his eyes shining with tears. "I don't know about this Hillary Clinton lady," he said, his lower lip starting to quiver. "Does she really think I'm deplorable?" Like, okay, that's a crazy story, but what was your source for that? I assume God? So nowadays, Wolff's got a podcast, also called Fire and Fury, and during the Halloween 2024 episode, he finally revealed one of his big secret sources for his most popular book. Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced financier, former Trump BFF, and shoot, I know there's something else about him I should mention.
I have more than dozens. I probably have 100 hours of Epstein talking about the inner workings of the Trump White House and about his long-standing, deep relationship with Donald Trump.
Well, thanks for sharing all that stuff, Mike. It's so cool that you had all this stuff since 2018, and of all the points when you could have chosen to release it, you picked right now. I assume this is because he saw my last video and he was like, it's time. But this time, Wolff doesn't just make a claim without backing it up. He plays us about a minute of audio of Epstein speaking to Wolff in a restaurant sometime in 2017. He's sort of vaguely describing Trump's divide and conquer management strategy for his White House staff.
His people fight each other.
Right.
And then have outsiders. He sort of poisons the well outside. He will tell 10 people Bannon's a scumbag and Priest is not doing a good job. And Kelly has a big mouth. And what do you think? Jamie Dimon says that you're a problem, and I shouldn't keep you. And I spoke to Carl Icahn, and Carl thinks I need a new spokesperson. So Kelly, even though I hired Kellyanne's husband, Kellyanne is just too much of a wild card. And then he tells Bannon, I really want to keep you, but Kellyanne hates you.
Wow, what a toxic work environment. That does it. Those guys absolutely need to start a union. So in the Halloween podcast, that's the only Epstein clip we get. One 60-second yak back recording at the start of the episode, just enough to prove he actually spoke to Epstein at some point, and then the rest is Michael Wolff recalling stories Epstein apparently told him. Then, on November 2nd, the Daily Beast published a couple more clips from another one of Wolff's secret Epstein tapes. Wolff apparently provided them about 90 minutes worth of audio from an interview with Epstein at his New York apartment in August 2017. They published about 7 minutes total from that, but the article quotes some of the stuff we haven't heard. So the clip about Trump's White House is interesting, and I'll get into it a bit later. The stuff from the Daily Beast was almost all just Epstein spreading nasty but very true sounding rumors about Donald Trump. He had a scalp reduction for his balding. He has a fetish for sleeping with his friends' wives. Oh, the only part of the newspaper Trump reads is the entertainment section. Gasp! Wait, how do you gasp again?
So how do you know this?
That was close to straight.
To me, the most interesting reveals we got weren't from the Epstein audio, but from the rest of Michael Wolff's podcast, where he's just recalling things Epstein told him on other tapes that we haven't heard. And so that's what I'll mostly be talking about in this video. But first, I'd like to pose a question. Can we trust the things that Jeffrey Epstein said? Well, no. Not that this was his worst quality, but on top of everything else, Epstein was a massive liar. He fabricated stuff constantly, usually to brag and make himself seem smarter or more important, or to manipulate people or exaggerate the extent of his social circle. But plenty of times, he just lied for no reason at all. Once, when visiting Mark Middleton at the Clinton White House, much more about that in my next video, Epstein reportedly claims to have been a Navy SEAL. According to an anonymous source who was there, I just read a book on the SEALs, so I knew how to check if he was telling the truth, and asked him, "What was your class number?" A real SEAL could answer that in a second, but Epstein couldn't. He looked at me and smiled, and his face said, "You got me." I just smiled back at him, and we moved on. We're trying to catch a glimpse of the truth here through several layers of bullshit, and when we're listening to Wolff, he's recalling things that he heard 7 years ago and may not be completely accurately remembering them. For example, on the podcast, Wolff recounts a story Epstein told him about Trump's harebrained scheme to seduce his friends' wives. Trump would bring his friend's wife into his office and then call her husband on speakerphone.
And Epstein had a story that he said that Trump used to invite the prospective wife to his office and then get the husband on the phone, but not tell the husband that the wife was sitting there listening, and then engage the husband in sex talk about who he was fucking.
And then a few days later, the Daily Beast published the audio of Epstein telling that story, which we can now confirm was quoted in Fire and Fury. But it turned out that on the podcast, Wolff had slightly misremembered Trump's cucking strategy. It was the exact opposite. He would bring the husband into the office while secretly having the wife listening in on his phone.
He'd say, "Michael, come on, let's go to the office." He'd say, "Do you like having sex with your wife? How often do they? Come on, you must have had a better wife, right? Tell me about it. There's this girl's coming in from Los Angeles, so come over with your car. 3 o'clock, we can go upstairs. It's just me and you. You're going to have a great time. I promise you, Michael, the whole time, Victoria's been on the phone. Listen."
Now, obviously, that isn't a huge discrepancy. It's the kind of mix-up that anyone could make if they're remembering something from that long ago. My takeaway is that while I don't think Wolff tends to straight up lie, he also doesn't have an issue printing salacious rumors he has only one source for, and that source is history's most infamous child sex trafficker. So we can't really take anything we hear from Michael Wolff or Jeffrey Epstein at face value. Now, all this said, while I don't think we can rely on this stuff to provide us with new information, it is a good source for clarifying and corroborating things we've heard whispers of before. Okay, so let's get back to the stuff about Epstein describing the inner workings of Trump's White House. Now, out of everything from the podcast, this was the clip that went the most viral, obviously because it's the only clip where we actually hear right from Epstein. I heard a lot of people saying that Epstein's familiarity with internal White House politics means he must have been in contact with Trump in 2017, but that's not the vibe I get from it. Let me explain. In 2017, when this tape was recorded, Epstein was also speaking to Steve Bannon. The first time they met, Bannon had recently been fired from Trump's administration. And we actually know a bit about Bannon and Epstein's first meeting from another book of Wolff's, Too Famous. Their opening banter is truly chilling.
"You were the only person I was afraid of during the campaign,"
said Bannon, laughing, the first time they met. Meaning he believed Epstein knew dangerous secrets about Trump.
"As where you should have been,"
replied Epstein. That's how Michael Wolff writes, you know? Exact quotes from private conversations, no sources. Like, how the hell did he get those quotes? Well, the Halloween episode of Fire and Fury actually clears up this mystery for us. Apparently, in this case, it's because Michael Wolff was there in the room when Epstein and Bannon met. Why? Because Wolff was the guy who introduced them. So he was interviewing them both for Fire and Fury, and at some point, I guess he was just kind of like, "Dude, you know what I just thought of? Okay, you gotta meet my boy Jeff, all right? I got a feeling you guys would click. You're like probably the two most evil dudes I know." However it happened, in the podcast, Wolff describes how when Epstein and Bannon met, they immediately started dishing about Trump.
Epstein is just watching Trump, the guy he knows, from the sidelines.
Yeah.
And then Bannon has fallen out with Trump. So they instantly bonded. I mean, I saw this immediately. It was like two long-lost brothers, and they couldn't get enough of each trying to explain Donald Trump to the other, but even to themselves. I think they both hated Donald Trump, or he had come to be so big in their head that they hated him. And then they were confounded by this phenomenon. So again, it was how to explain this.
Okay, so that's how he got the quote. He was in the room. Who knows? Maybe this is the explanation for how he found out about Trump's affair with Nikki Haley. Now here's some audio of their first sexual encounter. Having introduced them, I was, of course, sitting in the cuck chair at the time. I don't think I've made a video where I say cuck this much. Anyway, so back to that audio clip of Epstein. Doesn't it kind of sound like he's just sort of repeating things that Bannon had whined to him about? Why would Epstein care that Trump told 10 people that Bannon was a scumbag? Wow, that is so rude. That is so rude and 100% correct characterization of Steve Bannon. Now, this is pure speculation, but I don't think this audio is proof that Epstein was in regular contact with Trump in 2017. Now, even if Epstein explicitly said, "I was in contact with Trump in 2017, that sounds exactly like the kind of thing he'd make up just to seem connected. I highly doubt Epstein was an actual White House insider. The official story is that Epstein and Trump had a falling out in 2004, and even though many people have tried to claim Epstein and Trump kept hanging out after that, I have never seen compelling evidence at all. But speaking of that fallout, Wolff shares a little anecdote in the episode that, if it's true, really fills in a lot of the gaps for me, answers a lot of questions that I've had about it. So a quick catch up here. There's two competing theories for why Trump and Epstein stopped being BFFs in 2004. One is that Trump dumped Epstein after he caught him doing Epstein stuff at his resort Mar-a-Lago. The other is that in 2004, they both bid on the same oceanfront property in Palm Beach and Trump won. Now, confession time, I have not had the kind of life where I've had to compete against one of my best friends in an auction for an oceanfront supermansion. Now listen, I understand if you're in your 30s and your friend group isn't talking about buying oceanfront property, controlling the free world, and collecting sexual blackmail material, you need to elevate your circle, your network is your net worth, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But I never understood why something like this would make these guys with so much in common decide to cut all ties. Wolff gives us some crucial missing context.
In 2004, Epstein had the high bid on a house in Palm Beach. I think the bid was $36 million. And then he brought Trump along to give him some advice about moving the swimming pool. But then Trump went around Epstein's back and bid $40 million for the house.
Okay, I get it now, right? So Epstein takes Trump along to scope out his dream house and plan the landscaping. And then Trump sneaks off and then slightly overbids him like some Price is Right asshole. Epstein's also confused at this point because he knows Trump is broke. So he's guessing Trump is fronting for someone else and it's all just money laundering. And then after Trump snipes away this house from Epstein, he never even lives in it. He sells it a couple years later for $95 million to this Russian oligarch, Dmitry Rybolovlev, with ties to Putin. What side are you on in this fight, Epstein or Trump? If I had the opportunity to crush one of Epstein's dreams, I gotta say, I would do it.
So Epstein was pissed.
Yeah.
Of course. And he began to threaten lawsuits, and he began to threaten press exposure. I mean, he was really, really, really pissed when those guys lose a dream house.
Yeah.
And that was the point at which Epstein's own legal problems, the problems with the girls, began. And certainly in Epstein's telling, this all happened because it was Trump who first dropped the dime on him.
Now, just to be clear, we do know now that it wasn't Trump who dropped the dime on Epstein. Palm Beach police actually kicked off their investigation after hearing from a woman who had found $300 in her teenage stepdaughter's purse. But considering the timing, with the police knocking on Epstein's door right as he's threatening Donald Trump with legal action, it's very easy to imagine why he would jump to blame the Orange Man. It was like 2004. Epstein was patient zero for Trump derangement syndrome. Everyone used to love Trump back in those days. Not really. This story doesn't give us that much new information, but it adds context to something we'd heard before. And like a lot of Wolff's claims, it just sort of feels true, you know? Like after all the time they spent together flying on planes and being creeps to models, I knew the betrayal had to be something deeper than just, he wanted the same house as me. Now, one of those models who they were creeps to was Stacey Williams, who was part of the other Epstein-related October surprise of 2024. Just a heads up, things are going to get pretty gross for the next couple minutes, so skip ahead here if you want to avoid hearing details of her allegation against Trump. Stacey Williams was a hugely successful model in the 90s. Sports Illustrated ranked her as their 19th best swimsuit model ever. And if you remember that weird time before the internet, that's a huge deal. Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition is still a thing, and I 100% support anything that can upset Jordan Peterson this much. Anyway, Williams said in a Zoom meeting that she dated Epstein in the early 90s and that Epstein introduced her to his good friend Trump at a Christmas party in 1992.
And it became very clear then that he and Donald were really, really good friends and spent a lot of time together.
A few months later, Williams said she and Epstein visited Trump at his apartment in Trump Tower. Greeting Williams, Trump, in full view of Epstein, pulled her toward him and groped her all over her body.
And I froze because I was so deeply confused about what was happening because the hands were moving all over me. Yet these two men were like smiling at one another and continuing on in their conversation. Jeffrey and I left. And when we got down to the sidewalk, he looked at me and started just berating me. He kept saying, "Why did you let him do that? Why did you let him put his hands all over you? What?" And he made me feel so disgusting. As I absorbed what happened a few minutes later, I felt like that was some sort of sick bet or game between the two of them. I was rolled in there like a piece of meat for some kind of challenge or twisted game.
Stacey's story was corroborated by two friends of hers who say Williams told them about Trump's attack in 2006 and 2015. Trump himself sent her a creepy postcard from Mar-a-Lago, which she's kept to today. And on his podcast this week, Michael Wolff also corroborates her story, casually mentioning that this is all old news to him.
Yeah, I mean, I heard this story from Epstein. In his telling, he was pissed, but at the same time, he seemed to think it was funny, I guess, or Trumpian. And I remember him specifically saying Donald was incapable of not trying to cop a feel.
So Wolff goes on to tell some truly disgusting stories Epstein told him about Trump molesting random women. Wolff explains this behavior by saying he just thinks of Epstein and Trump as 1980s guys. 1980s guys. I didn't realize that was a thing. I guess the 1980s were just a locker room decade. Eventually, he gets back to the topic of Stacey Williams. And I think this is really important. He validates Stacey's suspicion that sharing women was a kind of game between the two of them.
And they were very competitive about the women. So Stacey Williams recalling that there was a competition, I think is probably exactly accurate. Part of this competition, part of how did the girls elevate you? I mean, they enjoyed the competition. And I think that Trump was envious about Epstein's girlfriends, which included actresses and models. I mean, Stacey Williams. So I think that this was always part of the admiration that Trump had for Epstein.
Now, at this point, Stacey's story sounds extremely credible to me. Not only has it been corroborated all these times, not only does she have this evidence, the story also shares similarities to stories from other women who spent time in both Trump and Epstein's orbit. She was a model. She could tell that Trump and Epstein were very close friends. The way that Trump moves in on her like a bitch. But the part of the story where Trump forces himself on her and then Epstein chews her out for allowing that to happen reminds me a lot of Katie Johnson's deposition, where Johnson claims to have been sexually assaulted by Trump at one of Epstein's parties when she was only 12, and then was screamed at by Epstein afterward because he'd wanted to be the one to take her virginity. Even without Katie Johnson's story, there are women like Chelina Middlefart, who appears to have dated both men, or Anushka DeGeorgiou, who spent time being sex trafficked by Epstein before dating Trump after she was introduced by Ghislaine Maxwell. Michael Wolff claims to know of another woman who would go on that list.
And in fact, there was a moment in which they shared a girlfriend. They were both openly, possibly proudly, going out with the same girl at the same time.
Do you know who that was?
I do, yeah.
Can you tell us?
No, I wouldn't. No.
No worries, Wolfster. I know you got to save some scoops for the next book. So this is actually the part of this whole thing that pisses me off the most. Michael Wolff has shared a few minutes of audio, and it's all Epstein just talking shit about Trump. Oh, he's a bad boss. Oh, he's a fake friend. And he's got a fake scalp.
So you probably know he had a scalp reduction.
Whatever. But how can you just say you have this recording of Epstein corroborating this woman's story of assault and not release that? Like, that would be really helpful. You know, I guess Wolff is just an 80s guy like that. Finally, the other big story here was Wolff claiming to have seen some possibly incriminating photos of Trump at Epstein's house surrounded by young girls.
But in having this conversation, Epstein, on more than one occasion, would bring out these photographs that he had of Trump. You know, he would go and he would take them out of the safe, and there were about a half a dozen photographs, and they were, you know, from the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
They were Trump at Epstein's Palm Beach house, sitting around the pool with these young girls. And the young girls are topless, and in some of the pictures, they're sitting in his lap. I mean,
whoa.
And then there's one I especially remember where there's a stain, a telltale stain on the front of Trump's pants, and the girls are pointing at him and laughing. And then he would return them to the safe. And I would say it was likely that they would have been there when the FBI, Trump's FBI at that point, not to put too fine a point on it, raided Epstein's house and took the contents of the safe in 2019.
This is actually the second time we've heard descriptions of these exact photos. The first time was in the book American Compromat, where author Craig Unger says, after Epstein's friendship with Trump soured, he was known to show people photos of Trump in compromising positions. An associate of Epstein's, who asked not to be identified, told me that Epstein showed him one photo of Trump with a topless young girl. In another, the source said, Trump is with two young girls who are said to be laughing as they point out what appears to be a wet spot in an unfortunate location on his pants. The description of the photo suggested that it was a semen stain, but the photos have never been released. When I first read this, I thought the existence of these photos was very dubious, but I have to say it means a lot more coming from a first-hand source who's speaking on the record, even if that source is Michael Wolff, and the record is the Fire and Fury podcast Treehouse of Horror episode. So there you go. This is a little bit of a different type of video for me. Normally, breaking news is not my thing. I had to write, record, and shoot this episode as quickly as possible. More clips kept coming out while I was doing it, so very likely I missed some stuff, but I thought I could add a few things to the conversation. A lot of this, pure speculation on my end, so if I'm wrong about any of it, I will delete this video like a coward. That's my goblin promise. And support me on Patreon. Please, give me money. Go on there. I got some more Epstein extras I'll be putting up there soon. You can get the uncensored version of my Epstein Trump video, and you'll get early access to the uncensored version of my Clinton Epstein video. Give me your money. I need it. I don't need it, but I really would like it. Normally I like to have like some kind of a conclusion way of wrapping up a video, but I guess in this case I'll just say, hey, happy U.S. election, everybody. Don't forget, the election is the reason for the season. Now, the Chill Goblin YouTube channel has decided not to endorse a candidate for president. I just wish they both could win. All I ask is that you get out there and you exercise your civic right to vote or not vote, depending on whatever one you feel like doing. But don't elect anyone I wouldn't elect. Should I just send it like that? It feels kind of abrupt.